Hello and welcome to the National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar, Making Road Safety Fly, a corporate leader's insight and lessons from 3 decades in the industry. My name is Jerome Karslake and I'm Director of the NRSPP and its many activities. To find out more, check out our website and sign up to our newsletter, follow us, and you can learn about all the amazing things we're doing and webinars just like this one, which we'll be featuring very soon. So today's session will go for approximately 60 minutes. We've allocated around 40 minutes for David to present his wisdom to us and 20 minutes for questions as we'll go through. We are recording today's session and it will be sent out in a link following it with the PDF as well. We love to make our webinars as interactive as possible, so please send your questions through. For those of you who are new to Zoom, I have this, chuck them in there and then we've got a nice record of what's going through and the chat box is open as well for everyone. And now what we're going to do is introduce our presenter for today, for those who don't know. So let me introduce David Jenkins. There he is. Welcome, David.
Welcome, Jerome.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, mate, it's awesome to have you. So for those of you who don't know much about David Jenkins has been involved in safety for 35 years. In this NRSPP webinar, he's going to be the industry leader. He's going to share his knowledge, perspectives on road safety built over more than 3 decades, including short-term measures that can really improve road safety immediately and how educating consumers can drive demand for vehicle safety in the long term. He's formerly the VP for Safety and Security in Australia for a major international mining company. Some of you may know BHP Billiton, where he led changes to vehicle safety that improved safety performance and reduced costs dramatically. Today, David runs a US-based safety and risk management consultancy. So over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Jerome, and thank you to everybody who's online at the moment for dialing in, listening to me waffle on for the next 40 minutes. I hope you find it useful. So this is the topic. Here we go. And about the logo. So, there's a little bit of background to the logo. I'm a risk-focused person, have been for all my career. So here we are. My logo is comprised of black swans. Rare, unpredictable, catastrophic. People might say COVID-19 was a black swan event. We then have the grey rhino. These are the known unknowns, threats that we ought to see, but we don't often. And you could think, contemporary right now is probably climate change. It doesn't really matter whether you believe it or not. Climate doesn't care. So, and then we have the elephant, and the elephant is that large, conspicuous, unaddressed thing that lurks in the corner of the room. In a driving contest, it's it's that driver that you've heard about, that perhaps you're a bit nervous about, but all your clients really love because he delivers on time. So, it's that, it's that difficult issue. And then the canary, vigilant, proactive, insightful. The canary in the coal mine is the analogy. And that can be your processes. It can be the way you lead. It doesn't really matter what it is. The canary is what tells you, how do you know you're in control? So anyway, let's talk about airlines. How do they manage tens of millions of passengers, moved around the world every year with, from a large commercial airline standpoint, almost zero accidents? How do they do that? First of all, they focus on the people. Training and competence assessment, very serious candidate selection process. Incredible use of simulators. The initial type approval. So you do your basic training or your core training, and you're accepted as a commercial pilot. But when you go and do your type training on an Airbus or a Boeing or whatever, they spend far more time in a simulator than they do in actual flight time. So tremendous amount of simulator time. They do these multi-crew cooperation courses, and nearly all their, well, not nearly all. A significant proportion of their recurrent training is actually in simulator time, and then it's in-flight assessment. It's almost the equivalent of those of you know Smith driver training, where someone's watching how you drive. Well, they have people watching how they fly. And then they have flight data monitoring systems similar to real-time IVMS. These actually assess how well they conform in their flying to the way that they have been taught and the procedures that are in place. And these are really sophisticated systems, giving real-time data to either contractors, monitoring expert contractors, monitoring the data coming in, or to an airline's own safety center. I've actually been to the safety center of Australia's largest airline, beginning with Q, and seen how they use this data and are continually coaching their pilots. Fatigue management, obviously everybody knows they have duty time. If all of you have flown enough, at some point will have been told, I'm sorry folks, the mechanical defect that caused the delay means we've run out of flight hours and we're waiting for the new crew to arrive. And then you got health and wellness. You got regular medical checks with increasing attention to mental health. And I know that mental health in the workforce is an international concern. It's not just one of airlines. The mining industry has made extensive efforts to try and improve mental health. The offshore industry is doing the same for offshore crews, and the marine industry, and so on and so forth. And obviously a substance abuse policy. Then you got the aircraft itself. Heavy reliance on technology. You've got all these things here. I'm not going to go through them all. You can read them later, you can read them now. But technology is the key support mechanism to help pilots be successful. It either warns them or corrects them or prevents them from doing things that the aircraft is incapable of. I actually had the privilege of going in a simulator for the Airbus A330, and the chief training pilot said, "Hey, look, pull back on the stick as hard as you can, and just try and make the aircraft stall." And the system just would not let me do it. It wouldn't let me go into a power dive. It just would not let me do it. Now, interestingly enough, if everybody remembers the two crashes of the 737 MAX, that resulted in significant loss of life, one of the warning systems was optional. It was actually a pay for upgrade, and its absence prevented or inhibited the pilots from understanding what was happening with their aircraft, and was a contribution to those fatal crashes. So, it's important to get the full suite of technology and not just part of it. And then you got the operation, and you think about everything. Again, everybody who's flown an aircraft, you've seen the pilots walk around the aircraft before takeoff. You've probably heard them chatting in the cockpit and going through their flight planning and doing all their pre-flight inspections. You've got air traffic control, and if you think of air traffic control being the safe road, and then you have the continuous in-flight monitoring and the communication systems to make sure that the aircraft stay on the safe road at the right height, in the right direction, navigating around weather threats or other threats. Remote engine and component monitoring. You may or may not know that that engine manufacturers provide services of real-time in-flight engine monitoring. They're monitoring whether or not there are any metal chips appearing in the magnetic sensors. They're looking at vibration to the point where they can say, hey, look, you know, at your next port call, where you have a maintenance center, we need to drop engine number 4 and swap it out, and so on and so forth. So really, really smart technology. Flight data monitoring again of pilots and how they're behaving. Pilot feedback, you know, post flight feedback on any deficiencies or and anonymous reporting of events, and obviously then defect reporting and maintenance. So, you know, the airline industry has this very successful track record using all of these components to deliver flight after flight after flight, which is safe and efficient and effective. At that point, I shall stop and ask whether anyone has any questions.
Thanks, David. I think one of the fascinating things that sort of leaps out to me in what you sort of just talking about then is there's all these elements. Is there any silver bullet in the aviation industry? What is that keeps them safe?
No, I mean, it's, if you think about road safety, we've agreed that the best approach is a safe system approach, right? You know, it's, you know, and it's training and it's vehicles and it's the road design and it's enforcement, if you like. And then the last component is the rescue services when it all goes wrong. Airline safety has some of that, but fundamentally it's that whole collective of stuff. It's not just the technology, it's not just the training, it's how it all comes together.
So how do you make that business case to people, as I guess some of the senior sort of people, but there is no silver? Because I get asked, I've been asked that a few times by senior people, what is the silver bullet for workplace road safety, Jerome?
If only there were one, we'd have it, wouldn't we? Because I mean, how long have we had roads? How long have we had cars? How long have we had accidents? And if it were that simple for a silver bullet, we'd have done it by now. Surely it wouldn't require someone like me, you know, to you know, come up with something. But I think that you know, I think we start with the same principles. So if there aren't any questions, then why don't we just move on to the next bit and say, well, you know, what's with that as an analogy?
Yep.
And recognizing that the airline industry is driven by national and international regulations that force a significant investment in each of those components. Yeah. So it's not really a debate. You gotta do it or you don't fly, right? So and we're not there yet in road safety. Let's face it. So, but then you can look at Boeing's current challenges, and you could say, well, leadership was not on that list anywhere, but leadership is fundamental. Just fundamental. And so there's been a lot of talk about Boeing's leadership and what drove it, and you know, whether it moved from a company of engineers and pilots to a company of accountants. I'm oversimplifying, but you know, in the big scheme of things, that's much of the current dialogue. And then, interestingly enough, you know, they fought for years to have a federally mandated safety management system. They actually pushed back and said, no, we got it. We don't need a safety management system. And it wasn't until 2017, in the face of significant penalties by the FAA for other issues, that they caved in and said, yeah, okay, we'll have a safety management system. Yeah, well, you know, if that's the way you're going to behave, then you kind of get what you get.
Nice.
So yeah,
Perfect
that's
segue to move on.
all right. There we go. What if road safety could be like flying? So if we were to be like the airline industry, what could we think about changing? So this is me in that flight simulator. I was actually landing at Hong Kong airport, I think, successfully, I might add. Graduated driver licensing. There's a lot of talk about that in the UK at the moment, where it isn't there. But you know, this idea that you don't just do a one and done driver licensing program, that you have a series of steps that you go through before you're considered to be, I hesitate to use the word competent, but yeah, there we are. I mean, absolutely, we could make greater use of simulators and virtual reality tools. I mean, can you imagine using a virtual reality headset to better educate future drivers, whether they're young drivers or whether they're mature drivers who are, you know, arriving in the country for the first time from a place which had slack, you know, training systems. You could educate people about the risks of the road and train them to look for hazards without placing them at risk. You don't want to scare them using simulators. You don't want to keep making them have crashes. That's not constructive. That just terrifies people. But you can educate people in a really meaningful way about the risks of distracted driving, for instance, which we know is a significant 1/3 and increasing contributor to fatalities and serious injuries, and that's a global thing. It's, you know, it's not just Australia or UK. You look at anywhere, whether it's European data, whether it's Australian, New Zealand data, or whether it's American data, North American data, distracted driving is a big issue. So how do you, in particular for the youth of today, I mean, how do you get them to really get it without, you know, in the most effective manner? And I think simulators and virtual reality is one of those things. Formula One drivers spend more time in simulators than they do on the track. And if we can do it for people who place themselves at the very cusp of safety every time they get out and race, I'm sure we could do it for the general population. Check drives. I'll mention Smith driver training because many people know it, but there are, you know, a number of organizations that provide, you know, the ride along expert who gives you coaching on your driving. Telematics. I'm a great believer in telematics, in particular the use of internal, external facing cameras. Not because I'm trying to catch people out, but because it is one of the greatest support mechanisms for professional drivers to demonstrate that they were actually doing everything in their power to be safe at the time some lunatic came along and did something daft. And so I really, you know, particularly for truck drivers who anybody goes on Facebook and looks at some of the videos that come out of the States. There's one particular site that I can't remember, but it's about road rage but mainly it's truck drivers who've got these, you know, video cameras and it's unbelievable what people do. And if they hadn't had those video cameras, they'd have been on the hook for you know, significant damage and, you know, prosecution, jail, you know, who knows. So I think telematics is great. I think it is also a deterrent for those who might be tempted to, you know, look at their phone or their iPad or do other, you know, inappropriate things when they're driving. And then, you know, should we consider recurrent training using simulators? Right now it's one and done. You pass your test. If you're on graduated driver licensing, you get to the end of the phase of that. You're never retested. I think I have to go back for retesting when I reach a certain age in the United States. But, it's between what, 18 and 70, or 80, and in between, technology's changed. There is a push in the States to consider how do we educate people to use the technology available in the car. So we're doing for time, right? So driver performance, driver assist technologies. I'm a great believer in those. I drive a Ford F-150 Tremor, and I drive it because I tow an RV. Sorry, folks. I don't just use it as a terrace tractor. Today we flew to Key West. It's my wife and I's 25th wedding anniversary, and we're here on vacation. And so I drove 113 miles from my home to Charlotte Airport. And for 75% of that journey, I was hands-free using the Ford technology, which now that doesn't mean that I can't pay attention, because I've got two cameras scanning my face, and the minute I start trying to play with my iPhone, which I would never do, by the way, but if I look out the window for too long, or whatever it is, the system will bark at me, and if I don't pay attention, it will actually disengage. But if I start to drift off and become fatigued, if I'm relying on the technology to keep me in the lane and adjust my speed, and I start to fall asleep, and again it will bark at me, and eventually it will slow down and stop the car. Distracted driver detection, fantastic. There's more and more of that available right now. Fatigue management policy, substance abuse. I've already talked about camera monitoring, and then health and wellness checks for professional drivers. People with insulin-dependent diabetes who maybe aren't managing their health well. People with chronic sleep apnea. Those sorts of things. We saw that in one of my previous employers. We had glasses we had cameras that were scanning drivers of haul trucks. You imagine, a Cat 797 moving at 40-50 kilometers an hour in a mine, humping 365 tons of material in the back. And we identified drivers that were having micro sleeps, that, and were traveling hundreds of meters in this truck, asleep. If it happens in haul trucks, I'm sure it happens on the road as well. So the technology exists, and increasingly this type of technology is available in modern vehicles, and you don't have to rely on the add-ons as much. Historically we've relied on third parties to provide this sort of technology, and we've plugged it in, and sometimes with success, and sometimes it's been horrible. It's actually caused more problems than it's actually tried to solve. So does this, so that's that piece. The vehicle, I mean, just buy or lease a 5-star NCAT compliant vehicle. Don't do anything else. I mean, why you buy, and why on earth would you buy a manual car for a professional driver nowadays? I mean, seriously, get real. I mean, I don't think I could buy a manual car in the United States, so all right, I'm a bit biased. But why would you buy a manual ute for someone who spends all his time on the road and all the time in traffic? I mean, because if you do that, it's damn difficult to have autonomous emergency braking. Yeah, it's difficult to get the technology if you don't buy the right car. So buy the right car. It's cost effective. It's cheap as chips compared to the risk. Operate as designed and avoid unnecessary modifications. Please stop fitting bull bars to your vehicles. Just don't. It's not necessary for a modern car. I know there will now be a howl of people out there who either are online or look at this later or read it and go, yeah, he doesn't know what he's talking about. That bull bar saved me when I hit the kangaroo and yada, yada, yada. How do you know? If your bull bar hadn't been fitted and you'd hit it with the ordinary vehicle, how do you know the outcome would have been different if you'd been driving a 5-star vehicle? Because you know what? You talk to the manufacturers and they'll tell you their vehicles will survive a strike. So yes, you may have to replace some little bits and pieces at the front, but your vehicle shouldn't be disabled. And if you're going that fast and hitting something that big that your vehicle is disabled and that badly damaged, I don't actually think a bull bar would make that much difference. You're just going to be repairing and replacing 2 lots of kit. Prohibit unauthorized modifications. Even a small change in tire diameter can end up defeating the algorithms that the car uses for effective ABS, electronic stability control, and other essential safety features in a car. Raising the suspension will do the same thing. Putting a bunch of stuff up really high really doesn't help. We already proved that when we crash tested the Toyotas when I was with BHP as part of the introduction of the 5-star NCAP requirement. If you raise the center of gravity, rollovers are more likely in utes. It's a no-brainer. So you need to think really hard about what you put in the tray and on the roof. And then those are the vehicles you directly control. But what about your grey fleet? What are your policies? Yeah, just think. If you say, I'm going to be super safe about my own fleet, but I also have 30% of my driving activity done by employees using their own vehicles for work purposes, what are you going to do there? How are you going to manage that? It's not easy, and it can end up being quite contentious. But at some point, you've got to get your head around it if you're going to be honest about improving road safety. So does driver assist technology, make a difference? These are all the figures. I'll not go through it all. But for those of you that are struggling to get traction with your, whether it's with your operations folk, whether it's with your senior leadership team, whether it's with the board, whether it's just with your workforce, convincing them that having this stuff actually makes any difference, or whether it's with the people who are just in charge of the cash, whether it's the accountants. I have to tell you, with BHP, I actually took accountants along as well as operations folk when we had our meetings with the Ford safety team. I took members of the procurement team to our conversations with Ford about the new Ford Ranger at the time. involve them in driving the car with the technology so they could understand how they work. We were the first non-Ford employees to drive the new Ford Ranger. And it was a game changer because they actually understood the added benefits, and along with the other work I did to say, hey, look, you know, if we buy these vehicles at this price point, we're actually going to save 15 grand at least per vehicle because we're not going to fit this stuff in there anymore. You know, the dialogue became really easy. So involve the right people, educate them. You have to educate. This is some data from 2020. You'll see the reference there. Unfortunately, despite the reduction in claims, insurers are still clinging to the idea that the technology isn't proven enough to reduce premiums. And their counter argument is the technology results in greater repair costs when there are crashes, and therefore the trade-off isn't there yet. And so insurance premiums still keep going up, but there we are. Any questions at this point?
We have. We've got a number that are coming, David. So I'll throw a first one here from, it's maybe a bit more of a comment. So Len throws in, the airline industry is full of employed specialists. The roads industry does not have fully professional operators, and the level of skills and knowledge is not well regulated. The average person on the road has no knowledge nor interest in safe systems. Thoughts?
Yep, absolutely right. Absolutely right. But you know, you can still do a lot. I can't tell you the number of times when I had people say, well, look, I can't do anything about the other people on the road. I really can't. You know, I mean, I'm as safe as I can be. I've got my safe vehicle. I'm driving safely, but I've still got this other muppet out here doing, you know, whatever. But actually, you know, that's where technology helps. You know, blind spot indicators, lane wandering assist, autonomous emergency braking, post-crash braking, pre-crash braking, you know, that whether the technology is in your vehicle or in theirs, the more technology we have, the more likely we are to reduce accidents and be more tolerant of human error, right? So I am a strong believer that driver assist technologies, they're not the solution, but they are an important contribution to compensating for either intended or inadvertent poor driving behaviors. We can't change the world,
yeah,
right? We can't. But we can go a long way as we can do our bit, and I'll talk a little bit later on why us doing our bit can make a big contribution.
Peter certainly agrees around the F1 simulators, saying, look, says it definitely sort of works. Todd raises a question here. F1 teams are also limited to a couple of practice days a year. Even if that weren't the case, the cost to run an F1 car makes it not possible to practice test more. So this is a bit of a red herring. Isn't there evidence that shows that people that use simulators get confidence without the ability?
Okay. Well, that sounds a bit counterintuitive because F1 drivers gain the confidence and gain the ability and actually rely on the simulators to give them, you know, to hone their skills to get the right line on the track on the day that they're out racing or practicing and so on. I don't think I'll argue the point, you know, but I just think that forever we've taken learner drivers, put them in a vehicle with a driving instructor of, you know, one level of competency or another, right? So you might argue that between individuals, or individuals always have variances in the same way that you have good teachers and bad teachers. You know, that sure we can all remember at school or university where we had great lecturers or great teachers, and we had some that we went, oh, God, not that class. And I'm pretty sure that, you know, with driving instructors, it's or any instruction or any trainer, you know, it is the same. I've had great trainers and I've had awful ones. So at least with technology, you could standardize something and start from a common baseline. There is, I would agree, a danger, and you would need to think carefully about how you use the technology, that you're not trying to teach drivers to be streetcar racers.
Mm.
It's not about teaching them to drive fast, get into a skid and recover. It's actually to teach them not to get there in the first place.
I like that point. That's a really good one. Another one here from Todd. Do you have some evidence you can point to about vehicle modification, ADAS calibration? This is a hot topic across Australia and NZ currently, but there seems to be a bit of a lack of evidence to show the impacts.
Hey, look, I can only recall the submissions we made to the mining regulator in Queensland when there was a huge pushback on the introduction of 5-star NCAP vehicles and the removal of internal rollover or, you know, internal ROS, right? The union were particularly upset and irritated by it. And we had to provide a lot of evidence. And I think I don't have that at the moment. Excuse me, my wife has managed to lock herself out. Just bear with me for a second.
Well, considering it's your wedding anniversary, you certainly got to make sure.
Yeah, I don't know whether leaving her out there would have been a good idea.
You want a 6th wedding anniversary, mate.
Yeah. And look, it's that was what 2013, you know, 2012, you know, around about then. So we're, you know, it's over 10 years ago, and I can't remember the absolute specifics, but I do recall that within the expert response that we gave, we highlighted it, and it was evidence-based, based on conversations with manufacturers. So I know the evidence was there at the time, and I'm pretty sure that you can go. And I do remember talking to the VP for safety and design for Ford, you know, about modifications, and anecdotally, you know, we had the same conversation. Can I present you with, you know, a paper or something like that? No. If you want me to help you find it, or, you know, put you in touch with the people at Ford, for instance, and say, hey, look, you know, what are the parameters at which point a vehicle modification would defeat the algorithms in the safety systems in, you know, Model X? You know, what are the tolerances? I'd be happy to help.
Just mindful of time. We'll keep moving along. I'll hold it because there's a comment there from Noel. We'll hold that through to the end, and a couple others popping up as well. So we'll get on moving, I think, David.
All right. Okay. Let's keep going then. So then we talk about the operation, and all this is, you know, fairly obvious. Journey, you know, it starts with the risk assessment. It starts with the journey plan, and also being mindful that if circumstances change, then you need to consider whether or not the journey plan needs to change as well. Pre-departure vehicle inspections, depending on the nature of the vehicle, don't overcook it, you know. Checklists, this continuous in-vehicle monitoring with driver feedback. In the States, Ford are now really hot on offering telematics. So they'll as a professional fleet manager, you can go to Ford and have their pro kit, and they'll do the inside outside vehicle monitoring with driver feedback, give you all the data, and at the same time they'll tell you when your car needs maintained, needs to go in for an oil change or whether anything's wrong with it. So I think they're using this as a significant add-on value, to beyond manufacturing. Driver assist technologies, intelligent assist. Sorry, what's that? The traffic one now, where I forget the name of it. The one where the car will not exceed the speed limit if you enable it.
Wow.
So that is now mandated in the EU. Every vehicle produced after, I think, 2026 must have this technology fitted. And whilst it doesn't, whilst it is elective to use it at this time, it may well become, I could see a point in the future, intelligent speed assist, where you never know, they might make it mandatory. Everybody will hate that. I can't speed anymore. And then the other one is, another one in the EU is the auto call on accident, where it will automatically call the emergency services if certain safety systems are triggered. And you get that now on, I don't know whether you have it in Australia, but you get it on a number of vehicles in the US. I had a Volvo before I had my truck. And if I got into a crash, if anything deployed like a seatbelt tensioning system or an airbag, Volvo would call me on the in-car system. And if I failed to respond, then they would call 911 and send them to my location. So, that takes care of that fifth element, if you like, from selecting the right vehicle. And then you got the road. IRAP, for those who don't know about it, wonderful organization. They've got road rankings, road safety risk ranking data, great for journey management planning. And they cover a lot of the world. Adapt based on local knowledge, have a process for managing changes to the plan. And then, employers, larger organizations, I think grossly underestimate how much influence they can have on road design. And some people will say, and have said to me, well, we pay taxes. That's none of our business. That's why we pay taxes. We shouldn't have to do that. That's up to government. But you know what? I can think of 4 occasions when we worked collectively and we influenced the Shire and state in road design. We sponsored police overtime. We worked with the police to let them know when our shift changes were likely to take place for a very large contractor workforce so that they could be most effective in speed management. And we managed to reduce significantly the high range speeding and reduce the crashes and fatalities and serious injuries as a result. I mean, it was statistically significant. That was in Western Australia. In Queensland, we had IRAP come in when we did when we did the expansion project. Again, it was a long-term construction project, disruption to the community. We worked with the state and the Shire to swap out traffic lights on a major road for a roundabout. Difficult to run a roundabout. You'll only do it once. And installed road age protection and just basically worked hard with the community and the Shire and using professional road safety engineers to create the safest road we could and minimize the impact of our project. In Canada, we worked with the state during the early phases of construction on Janssen. And in Chile, we used IRAP to come in and survey a 100-kilometer road that we owned and operated, but had to give access to the public for, leading up to Escondida. And through using them, we managed to increase the road safety risk ranking by from a 2 to a 3. So, you know, these things are possible. Didn't cost $1 billion. I mean, in the big scheme of things, yeah, all right, you know, BHP, big company, right? But even smaller organizations you could work with IRAP to come in and sponsor road safety near your local school community. What would be the best treatments for the road to reduce the risk? You know, and then use that information to have a conversation with the Shire or you know, or the state. So these things are possible. And modest changes can have significant and long-term impact. So you can do a road treatment that will have a 30-year life. Yeah, it's a fantastic, you know, cost-effective investment in the community. Questions?
We have a few. I'll do this one that's in the chat from Noel, just going back to the camera sort of question. Like, he very much appreciates cameras for monitoring drivers' people, but they come with their own problems. For example, 1, doesn't that affect the driver's operator's psychology? 2, isn't that enslaving people and showing the highest degree of mistrust for them? 3, isn't it psychosocial hazard? And 4, is using cameras the only option because we've failed in better training methods?
Hey, look, all good questions. I think so. The psychology of the driver is how you enter into the conversation. If your solution is, hey, we're going to put these in the trucks to monitor you, well, you know, no good. I mean, it's like any other safety initiative. There needs to be a conversation. It should be evidence-based. It should be risk-based. It should be done in consultation with the workforce. There should be an open and honest conversation about about the upside and the downside. But if you do it from a point of trust, this is not about whether or not I trust you. This technology is here to help you. The internal facing. So one of the systems chosen by one of the world's larger oil and gas companies. So the big concern amongst the major oil and gas companies at the moment, so the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers, IOGP, is actually fatigue. They think they've got much of the rest done. They've actually introduced the requirement for 5-star NCAP compliant vehicles, and they're seeing those rolled out through their fleets. But their big concern right now, based on the data that they get every year from their statistics, is fatigue, and therefore increasingly they're installing these monitoring systems to provide the driver with real-time feedback before they get themselves involved in an accident. And then the AI technology, can help them analyze, the data so they can start to better understand, where is fatigue occurring, what time is it occurring, which cohort of people. So, the more data you have, the better, the better armed you are to try and come up with a solution. So, so yes, but but there will be some people who think, Big Brother's watching me, and I'm not quite sure how you completely overcome that. There will always be those who will be uncomfortable.
I think a really big one as well, which made earlier, is it helps defend the drivers as well. As I mentioned to you before this started, I discussed with a head of safety of a large logistics company just last night, gave me a call around this and shared all these continuous footages of the stress they're putting on their drivers because of these poor mistakes third parties are making around the vehicles.
Yeah, yeah. I look, yeah, look, I think, you know, if I were responsible for installing a system like this, which include and the camera system included impairment detection. Let's not just call it fatigue. Let's just call it impairment. Whether you're impaired through fatigue or through or any other reason, when you sleep apnea or whatever it is, what would you rather happen? Would you rather I provide a system that tells you that you are putting yourself and other road users into critical danger, perhaps fatal danger? So I got this technology that can stop you from dying. Would you rather have that? Can we have a conversation with your wife and ask her whether, should we put this in the cab or not? It becomes, this really human, what's in it for me and why, so yeah, just got to think of ways of engaging, really.
It's a change management getting that right.
Yeah.
I'll ask
Change is tough.
Yeah. And I'll just ask one quick question, then we'll move on. One here from James. Do you have the same view on simulators and their potential benefits to apply to all modes of transport, including motorcyclists, who contribute 15 to 20% of road fatalities? There seems to be opposing views that increasing their confidence rider competency levels may introduce greater risk taking. Big question.
Hey, look, I think it's a great question, and I think any use of simulators and giving people greater confidence in their ability to drive is how do you balance? Is that balance a conversation between I've improved your skill set, but just because I've improved your skill set, you're not Michael Schumacher, right? So don't. So we can talk about that as well as, because I think there's a whole other another component about the whole conversation of speed, which is at least 1/3 of the contribution to fatal and serious injuries in any country you go to, and is why do we continue to provide cars that can do insane speeds far beyond the designed the top. What's the top speed limit in Australia? Still 120 kph?
110, I think, would be in WA.
110. I know Northern Territory had an unregulated road for a while. I don't know whether that still exists, but setting that to one side, why did we allow cars on the road that can still do over 200 k? Why do it? Yeah, I'll be called a killjoy and unrealistic and all the rest of it. But, anyway, any other questions you want to hit on before we hit the closing slide?
I think because a couple more slides, let's go through them and we'll do that. Close the last ones at the end.
All right. So, to make safety better, I think, train and engage people better. Use a graduated new driver licensing approach where it doesn't already exist. Teach drivers how to use driver assist technology. Driver assist technology only works if you understand it and you activate it. Use technology to train drivers and not keep doing the same thing we've always done. IVMS and should we consider mandatory refresher training? Yeah, even if it is, I don't know. Do we place? I was thinking about this today. Could we place the onus on the car dealership to document in a credible fashion how they've educated the purchaser of the new vehicle with all the best U-Butte technology in how to use it? Because I know when I bought my F-150, the guy who sold it to me didn't understand it. But when I bought my Volvo, I had a 1-hour session on how to use the technology. So, I think there's an opportunity there. Provide the best vehicles. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Lobby for updates to national design rules. I think it's a disgrace that it is still possible to introduce 2-star and 0-star vehicles into Australia in this day and age, and still be ADR compliant. I mean, it just beggars belief. I think it's an absolute scandal. It is the simplest thing to change. Simplest thing. And just on this piece, because I think it's quite important, is that when we introduced the 5-star NCAP requirement for BHP, at that time, the Great Wall was being introduced and it was 2 stars. And I would like to think that we probably stopped that in its tracks. It was a cheap ute with but more comfortable on the inside, you might argue. In other words, the guys who were going out and buying, or the people who were going out and buying it, thought that they're given a good deal for their money. But what they were getting was a fundamentally unsafe vehicle. And I would like to think that we helped stop them in their tracks. And as a consequence, every future version that's come out has been 5-star NCAP compliant. So, buying 5-star, consumer-driven decisions by fleets makes a difference. Speed limits should match road design, not political sentiment. I'm sure those in New Zealand will recognize where that comment comes from. I've already said companies have far greater ability to influence road safety in their community than they realize. And again, small changes, long-term impacts. So if we talk about, my favorite, the black swan, new technologies, how hard are we looking for the risks that these new technologies bring? EVs have tremendous acceleration capacity. To me, it's a new generation of drivers at extreme risk. I mean, their 0 to 60 acceleration is just insane. Personally, I think it should be inhibited, but there we are. Distracted driving and speed. How do we change the dialogue on speeding? And why do we continue to allow vehicles to have these top speeds that are far, far, far beyond the legal limit? Safe vehicles. It's still possible for manufacturers to launch a new car which delivers 0 stars. It's not that they don't know how to deliver a 5-star vehicle; they choose not to. I don't understand the conversation that goes on in vehicle manufacturers and who drives that decision. It's got to be the marketing team. It's got to be the marketing team. So there's only 2 ways to change that: regulation and consumer pressure. And regulation is damn slow. Consumer pressure can be real fast. And who, where, and what are your canaries? How good are your risk assessments? Who is involved in them? How do you know the controls are effective? How do you know you're in control? There we are. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. We're coming up to the end, but we might just stretch a little bit over because we've got a few questions to throw out to everyone. So I hope you don't mind. We might just go a little bit over, or we can stop exactly on time. But have you got time just to go a little bit over, David?
I'm good. I'm good.
Excellent. So there's one here from, and I'll throw this in, I'll start on the behavior change that Tony sort of threw up. Behavior change is hard to achieve and needs a long range, and needs a range of interventions. Love to hear about any specific tips, research, what can be done to make it more effective, regulation, enforcement, because you've really gone about and done that.
Hey, look, doing the change I did in BHP, wasn't easy. But I was blessed by a CEO who swung by my office one day and said, "What are you working on just now?" And I was explaining, the cost benefits of moving and how much we were spending on vehicles going on our mine sites, and it's just an insane amount. You know, we buy a standard Toyota Hilux or whatever, and then spend 20, sometimes $25,000+ on extras, or much of it in the name of safety, and frankly, much of it a waste, and some of it actually making the vehicle less safe. So, in my experience, whether it's road safety or whether it was other areas where I've introduced significant change, a couple of them global industry, you need to be clear about the vision. You need to be clear about the business case, and you need to be clear about the human case. It's not enough to be passionate. It's not enough to be technically competent. You have to bring those two things together and create that business case. And then, having got that squared away, you've absolutely got to start at the top with the leadership team, because they're the people that are going to own this. And you need to work with them on the business case, on the risk assessment. And if you can't articulate it, you're probably stuffed. Because if you can't convince yourself and you can't convince your leadership team, you're probably wasting any time trying to introduce it on the ground.
Thanks for that, David. And another question is quickly from Damien. Vehicle modifications, bull bars has been a topic of discussion. We understand vehicle safety systems in place, but we choose to install them for the case of the operator able to limp home, working in rural Australia. Happy to be given an alternative option. So
buy 5-star vehicles and do your risk assessment on your journey planning. We know what time roofs come out to play, generally. We know where they are. Hey, look, the Ford Ranger, and it's not that I'm a Ford fan or or this insane supporter of Ford versus every other manufacturer, right? It's just that because of what happened, I had a lot more dialogue with Ford, although I also went to speak with Volkswagen and went around their factory in Germany and a couple of others, and global NCAP organization and so on and so forth. So it's not just Ford, but I'm better able to give you credible examples, data-driven examples. I can tell you that when the Ford Ranger was brought in, they had Skippy, their anthropomorphic kangaroo, right? That they crash tested the Ford Ranger at 100 kilometers an hour, and the vehicle survived and kept going. And they didn't just crash it once; they crashed it multiple times in different configurations. So the idea you need bull bars to survive an impact with a kangaroo to get home, I personally don't believe is as strong an argument as some people do. There is a historical thing, and again, this goes, I can go back to the original paper where we did submission to the mining regulator when we were having that discussion, is that if you go back to sort of the 60s, 70s, vehicles were pretty, weak at the front, and the fan was in front of the radiator, and the radiator was set quite well forward in the front of the engine bay, and therefore was very prone to any frontal impact, because any frontal impact would shove the fan through the radiator. So you not only lost your cooling fan, but you also lost the water in the radiator. And that's a little bit of the history where rubars came from, right? So yeah, fine. Back in that generation of vehicle, you could, support the argument that you needed that additional protection at the front to stop it. And we didn't have mobile phones, and we didn't have sat phones, and you really would be stranded until the next person came along, if they came along. So yes, that was an absolutely credible scenario, and that was one way of managing that risk. That's not the case now. You got sat phones, you got mobile coverage, and cars are designed differently. The radiator's set further back, and the fan's behind the radiator.
Thanks, David. I'll just quickly answer these next two ones quite quickly, and then I've got one last little closeout one. So sometimes with a speed limit, escape dangerous situations, but not continuous speed. Is it can it be overridden, do you think, the ISA in basically getting yourself out of a dangerous situation?
Yeah. I think you can boot and go for, and don't hold me on it, but about 10 seconds. So yeah, you can, don't and the ISA the ISA has, I mean, I've got it in my Ford. I could set it so that I physically could not go faster than X, or X number of miles an hour over the speed limit. It would actually physically inhibit me if I tried to do that. I have to be honest, I haven't activated that on my own car. I just choose not to speed.
Thanks, David. Last one here from Andrew. BEVs typically weigh more than ICE equivalents. BEVs are not only quicker to accelerate, but due to their additional weight are less safe with respect to stop and avoid. Should there be better understanding of these trade-offs, do you think?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think there are two things. There are any number of ICE vehicles on the road that are capable of pretty good acceleration. But I think they tend to be the more expensive vehicle, and therefore you might argue that tends to be the more mature driver that can afford a vehicle at that price point. And now you're getting EVs coming in at a lower price point and going into the secondhand market and available to younger drivers without the life skills, let alone driving skills, and maybe the urge. And absolutely, I mean, I think we may well come to a point at some time where there will be a conversation of, why have we got vehicles on the road capable of doing this sort of acceleration? It's not justified, it's not needed, and it should be inhibited.
So my last question to you, David, through all our discussion, what we've gone on, what would be the one take-home message you'd love to leave everyone with?
Oh God, I wish you'd give me a head up on that one before.
The best genius comes from the motor, I think.
Well, look, I think we know that road safety is the number one killer globally of youth, largely males, under the age of 25 and under. Yeah. We're killing the generation of tomorrow, and we have in our hands the means to significantly reduce that. It just takes the will. It just takes the effort to actually do it. I don't believe it's actually that hard to do simple things. Even if you don't do all the things that I laid out today, but you did some of them, collectively would make a huge difference.
Love it. Great way to close out. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for taking your time. Congratulations on your 25th wedding anniversary and joining us. That's a huge goal. We know it is a little bit late over in the US. Greatly appreciate you willing to share with us all. So thank you all very much.
All right. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for their participation and their questions. I appreciate it.
No worries. Enjoy the rest of your celebration.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.